When did the crushing weight of feeling completely powerless over your own life last destroy your peace? You know that moment, when you realized you keep making the same destructive choices, falling into the same toxic patterns, choosing the same wrong people, despite promising yourself, never again. You feel like a prisoner in your own mind, watching yourself repeat cycles you desperately want to break. In this video, I'll reveal Arthur Schopenhauer's most dangerous discovery about the illusion of personal autonomy, the terrifying truth that we feel free, yet every single choice is driven by forces we don't even recognize. Meet Ariadne, 28 years old, successful marketing executive who thought she had her life figured out. She prided herself on being rational, independent, making her own choices. But she kept finding herself in relationships with emotionally unavailable men, working jobs that drained her soul, and making decisions that left her feeling empty. She couldn't understand why she felt so powerless when she appeared to have so much control. What I'm about to show you will forever change how you see the hidden parts of yourself reflected in other people. You think you're making conscious choices, but Schopenhauer discovered something that will shatter that illusion completely. The uncomfortable truth is that what you call free will might be the greatest lie you've ever told yourself. This isn't some feel-good philosophy or surface-level self-help. This is about the fundamental delusion that keeps you trapped in cycles of suffering, and why most people never escape them. Schopenhauer's philosophy reveals the 5 specific illusions that make you feel powerless, and once you see them, you can never unsee them. Stay until the end, because I'll reveal Schopenhauer's most radical solution for breaking free from the blind will that controls your every move. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly how to recognize when you're being driven by unconscious forces and how to reclaim the only real power you actually have. But I'm warning you, this knowledge comes with a price, and most people aren't ready to pay it. Are you? Ariadne stared at her phone, thumb hovering over her ex-boyfriend Marcus's contact. She'd blocked him 3 times, deleted his number twice, and sworn to her friends she was completely done with him. Yet here she was at 2 a.m., feeling that familiar pull, that irresistible urge to text him. She felt like she was choosing to reach out, but something deeper was driving her finger toward that screen. Man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills, Schopenhauer observed in his groundbreaking work, On the Freedom of the Will. This single sentence destroys everything we believe about personal autonomy. Schopenhauer observed that most people believe they are the authors of their own desires, the masters of their own choices. We walk through life convinced that when we want something, we chose to want it. When we make a decision, we believe we rationally weighed options and selected the best path forward. This is the first and most fundamental illusion, the mirage of choice. But here's what Schopenhauer discovered that makes this so dangerous. You can choose your actions, but you cannot choose what motivates your actions. You can decide whether to text your ex, but you cannot decide whether you want to text your ex. That wanting, that desire, that impulse, it arises from somewhere beyond your conscious control. Think about your last major decision. Maybe it was choosing a career, ending a relationship, or moving to a new city. You felt like you weighed the pros and cons, made a rational choice. But if you're honest, wasn't there already a pull, a leaning, a preference that existed before you started your rational analysis? Weren't you really just finding reasons to justify what you already wanted to do? Ariadne realized this as she stared at her phone. She wasn't choosing to want Marcus back. That desire was arising from depths she couldn't access or control. Her conscious mind was just the narrator, creating stories about why this was a good idea, or why maybe things could be different this time. But here's where it gets dangerous. Most people spend their entire lives believing they're making free choices while being completely controlled by forces they refuse to acknowledge. 3 days later, Ariadne found herself at a coffee shop, supposedly working on a project. But her eyes kept drifting to a couple at the corner table. The woman laughing at everything the man said, the man checking his phone while she talked. Something about their dynamic felt sickeningly familiar, and she couldn't look away. She was discovering something unsettling about her own patterns of attraction. Schopenhauer's most controversial insight was that what we call our personality is actually the will expressing itself through us in disguise. We think we have preferences, tastes, and desires that make us unique individuals. But according to Schopenhauer, we are all puppets dancing to the same master, the blind, irrational will that drives all existence. This will isn't some mystical force. It's the unconscious drive that makes your heart race when you see someone who fits your type, the compulsion that draws you to certain careers, certain friends, certain destructive habits. You experience it as your authentic self, making authentic choices. But Schopenhauer revealed it as something far more sinister. The will operates through what he called motives, but these aren't conscious reasons. They're unconscious drives that present themselves to your rational mind as logical preferences. You think you like ambitious men because you value drive and success. But the will might be using that attraction to ensure you end up in relationships that recreate familiar patterns of emotional unavailability from your childhood. Ariadne watched the couple and felt a chill of recognition. Every man she'd ever been drawn to had that same distracted quality, that same way of making her feel like she had to earn his attention. She'd always told herself she was attracted to confident, independent men. But now she saw the puppet strings. Her attraction wasn't a choice. It was a compulsion, designed to keep her trapped in cycles of pursuing validation she'd never receive. The most disturbing part? The will doesn't care about your happiness. It doesn't want you to find lasting love, meaningful work, or inner peace. Those aren't its priorities. The will only cares about perpetuating itself, and it will sacrifice your well-being without hesitation to achieve its goals. This is why you keep attracting the same type of people, why you keep making the same mistakes, why your personal growth feels like running on a treadmill. You think you're evolving, but you're just finding new ways to serve the same master. But here's where it gets dangerous. The will has convinced you that these compulsions are your deepest, most authentic desires. A week later, Ariadne was in her therapist's office, explaining why she'd started texting Marcus again. "I realized we never really had proper closure," she heard herself saying. "And I've grown so much since then. I think I can handle his emotional unavailability better now. Maybe I can help him open up." As the words left her mouth, she felt a strange disconnect, like she was watching someone else perform a carefully rehearsed justification. In On the Freedom of the Will, Schopenhauer explained what he called the theater of reasons, the elaborate show your rational mind puts on to make unconscious compulsions appear like conscious choices. Your intellect becomes a servant to the will, a skilled lawyer whose job is to make irrational desires seem perfectly reasonable. This is how the system maintains its invisibility. The will doesn't operate through obvious compulsion. That would be too easy to recognize and resist. Instead, it presents you with compelling narratives that make its agenda feel like your own brilliant insight. You don't feel controlled. you feel enlightened. Schopenhauer discovered that the intellect's primary function isn't to seek truth or make good decisions. Its job is to create post hoc justifications for whatever the will has already decided. You experience this as thinking through a decision, but you're actually reverse engineering reasons to support a conclusion that was reached unconsciously. Watch how this works. The will wants you to reconnect with your ex. Your rational mind immediately begins generating reasons why this makes sense. I need closure. I've changed. Maybe he's changed too. I'm strong enough to handle it now. Each reason feels authentic and logical, but they're all just costumes the will puts on to hide its true agenda. The most sophisticated part of this system is that it uses your highest values against you. The will doesn't tempt you with obviously self-destructive choices. It wraps its agenda in noble language. Ariadne wasn't going back to a toxic relationship. She was practicing forgiveness, being mature about closure, and applying her personal growth. This is why willpower fails so consistently. You're not fighting against obvious temptation. You're fighting against your own intellect, which has been recruited to argue for the very thing that will destroy you. Your rational mind has become the will's most effective weapon against your own well-being. Ariadne sat in that therapist's chair, listening to herself speak, and suddenly saw the performance for what it was. Every reason she was giving was perfectly crafted to make her destructive choice seem like wisdom. She was watching her own intellect betray her in real time. But here's where it gets dangerous. The more intelligent you are, the more convincing your justifications become, and the deeper you sink into the will's deception. 2 months into reconnecting with Marcus, Ariadne found herself exactly where she'd been before, staring at her phone at 2 a.m., feeling invisible and unimportant while he was out networking again. But this time was different. This time, she could see the mechanism. She realized she wasn't just caught in a pattern with Marcus. She was caught in something far more terrifying: the eternal return of her own unconscious programming. Schopenhauer warned that a person can do what they want, but not want what they want. This creates what he called the pendulum of desire, an endless swing between the pain of wanting and the boredom of having. Most people spend their entire lives trapped in this oscillation, never recognizing that they're prisoners of their own unconscious drives. Here's how the trap works. The will creates a desire. You pursue that desire, believing satisfaction will bring lasting peace. You might even achieve what you wanted: the relationship, the job, the recognition. But instead of fulfillment, you experience either temporary satisfaction followed by new desires, or the crushing realization that getting what you wanted didn't fix the deeper emptiness. This is why Ariadne kept returning to Marcus. It wasn't really about him. He was just the current object her will had fixated on, to perpetuate her familiar pattern of suffering. If it wasn't Marcus, it would be someone else who activated the same dynamic: the chase, the uncertainty, the hope, the disappointment, the renewed chase. The most insidious part is that each cycle feels different. Your rational mind convinces you that this time is different, that you've learned from past mistakes, that you're making better choices. But Schopenhauer discovered that the will doesn't learn or evolve. It simply finds new ways to express the same fundamental drives. Ariadne could see it now. Every relationship, every career move, every major life decision had been variations on the same theme. She was attracted to unavailability because it replicated the emotional dynamic of her childhood. always trying to earn love from someone who couldn't give it. Her will had programmed her to seek this familiar form of suffering because it was the only kind of love she knew how to recognize. The truly terrifying realization was that she'd been making the same choice over and over again while believing she was exercising free will. She was like an actor who thought she was improvising when she was actually reading from the same script every night. The will had convinced her that her compulsions were her authentic desires, and her mind had spent years creating elaborate justifications for staying trapped. But here's where it gets dangerous. Recognizing the pattern doesn't automatically free you from it, and most people who see the truth sink even deeper into despair. Sitting in her car outside Marcus's apartment building, Ariadne had a choice to make. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to go upstairs, to try one more time to get the validation she craved. But for the first time in her life, she could see the will operating. She could feel its pull, observe her mind generating reasons why this was a good idea, and recognize it all as performance. The question was, what do you do when you can see the puppet strings, but still feel their pull? Schopenhauer's solution was radical, and it terrified most people who encountered it. He believed that true freedom didn't come from getting what you want, but from a complete cessation of wanting itself. This wasn't positive thinking or willpower or finding healthier desires. This was something far more existentialism shattering, the recognition that all desire leads to suffering, and the only escape is through what he called the denial of the will to live. This sounds like giving up, but Schopenhauer meant something far more sophisticated. He was talking about a fundamental shift in how you relate to your own desires. Instead of being driven by them or fighting against them, you learn to observe them with what he called aesthetic detachment, the same way you might watch a storm from inside a safe house. The path begins with what logotherapy founder Viktor Frankl would later call tragic optimism, the ability to find meaning even in unavoidable suffering. But Schopenhauer went deeper. He said the real liberation comes when you stop trying to escape suffering and start seeing through the illusions that create it. When you recognize that your desires aren't yours at all, but expressions of the universal will working through you. Ariadne felt this shift happening in real time. She could feel the familiar ache, the desperate need to see Marcus, to get some sign that she mattered to him. But instead of obeying that impulse or fighting it, she simply observed it. There's the will, she thought, trying to get me to participate in my own suffering again. The desire didn't disappear, but her relationship to it transformed completely. This is what Schopenhauer meant by freedom, not the ability to get what you want, but the recognition that what you want is not really yours to begin with. When you see that your desires are just the will expressing itself through your particular form, you can step back and choose whether to participate or not. The practice isn't about becoming emotionless or detached from life. It's about developing what Schopenhauer called compassion, the recognition that everyone is trapped in the same system, driven by the same blind will, suffering from the same illusions. When you see this clearly, you stop taking your desires so personally and start seeing them as universal human experiences. But here's where it gets dangerous. This path requires you to give up the one thing most people cling to desperately, the belief that you are special, that your desires matter, that your individual will should be satisfied. 6 months later, Ariadne sat in the same coffee shop where she'd first recognized her patterns. But everything had changed. Marcus had texted her the night before, the same manipulative message that would have sent her spiraling 6 months ago. This time, she read it, felt the familiar tug of the will trying to activate her old programming, smiled slightly, and deleted it without responding. She had found something more powerful than willpower. She had found the ability to see through the illusion entirely. Schopenhauer believed that those who truly understand the nature of the will gain access to what he called the world as representation, the ability to see life as it actually is, rather than through the distorted lens of personal desire. This isn't detachment from life. It's engagement with reality instead of engagement with illusion. When you stop being driven by unconscious compulsions, something remarkable happens. You start making choices based on what actually serves your well-being rather than what serves the will's agenda. Ariadne discovered that without the constant drama of chasing unavailable love, she had energy for things she'd forgotten she enjoyed: art, deep friendships, work that felt meaningful rather than just validating. This is the ultimate paradox of Schopenhauer's philosophy. When you stop trying to get what you want, you often end up with what you actually need. When you stop chasing external validation, you discover internal resources you never knew you had. When you stop believing your desires are sacred, you become free to choose which ones deserve your attention. The power isn't in eliminating all desires. That would be impossible and inhuman. The power is in recognizing which desires come from the will's blind programming and which ones serve your genuine flourishing. Ariadne could still feel attraction, still want connection, still have preferences. But now she could distinguish between desires that led to growth and desires that led to familiar suffering. She'd learned to ask herself, is this desire trying to solve an old wound? Or is it moving me towards something genuinely nourishing? The will's desires always had a desperate, compulsive quality. They promised to fix something broken inside her. Authentic desires felt different. They emerged from wholeness rather than neediness, from curiosity rather than compulsion. Most importantly, she'd developed what never give up. Philosophers like Viktor Frankl understood the ability to find meaning even when life doesn't give you what you want. When you're not constantly fighting against reality or trying to manipulate it to satisfy unconscious drives, you can actually see what's in front of you and respond to it wisely. This is what Schopenhauer meant by true freedom. Not the power to get what you want, but the wisdom to want what serves your deeper flourishing. Not the elimination of all suffering, but the end of unnecessary suffering created by unconscious compulsions. Not the ability to control life, but the clarity to respond to life consciously rather than reactively. The most profound change wasn't that Ariadne's life became perfect. It was that she stopped needing it to be perfect in order to feel whole. Ariadne's transformation wasn't magic. It was the result of seeing through the 5 illusions that had kept her powerless. The mirage of choice, the puppet master within, the theater of justification, the endless loop of suffering, and the belief that her desires were sacred and personal rather than universal expressions of the blind will. Now you have the same dangerous knowledge that Schopenhauer discovered over 180 years ago. You know that most of what you call free will is actually unconscious programming. You know that your rational mind is often working against your best interests, creating elaborate justifications for self-destructive choices. You know that your desires aren't as personal as you thought. They're expressions of universal patterns that trap millions of people in cycles of unnecessary suffering. But knowledge without application is just interesting philosophy. The real question is, what will you do with this awareness? Will you use it to step back and observe your own patterns with compassion? Or will you let the will convince you that you're different, that your desires are special, that your compulsions are actually authentic choices. Schopenhauer's path isn't easy. It requires giving up the comforting illusion that you're in control and embracing the liberating truth that real freedom comes from seeing through control entirely. But for those brave enough to walk this path, it offers something most people never find: the ability to live consciously rather than reactively, to choose wisdom over compulsion, and to find peace even when life doesn't give you what you think you want. The choice, as always, is yours. But now at least you know it really is a choice. If this video opened your eyes to patterns you've been blind to, subscribe for more dangerous truths about human nature that most people are too afraid to face. And remember, the will is counting on you to forget everything you just learned and go back to sleepwalking through your desires. Don't let it win.